If you get a new camera kit these days, you're most likely getting some kind of kit lens with it, and that kit lens most likely sucks real bad. It's probably a zoom lens, 24-70 around on full frame, maybe 16-50 on crop sensor, and they all have variable aperture values, meaning your aperture will automatically open or close as you zoom in and out. So not only is the lens itself usually not that sharp, but this variable aperture thing is often a pretty negative feature for beginners, as they usually have no idea why their lens is doing that. But it didn't used to be this way. Camera manufacturers used to take great care in how they packaged their camera kits and included a lens that they actually took a lot of pride in. They wanted their consumers to buy a camera kit and immediately take beautiful photos with that film SLR. This is the Minolta SRT-101, a film camera that came out in 1966. It had a few different kit lens options, but the default one that most people got with it was this, the MC Rocore 58mm 1.4. Now I know 58mm is not exactly 50, but it's in the same ballpark and it tells a much different story from digital camera kits today. And that story is that the 50mm focal length has been the most loved and accessible focal length since 35mm film photography became ubiquitous among working photographers. And the story isn't really that different today. Yes, lens and camera technology has come along in a huge way, obviously, since 1966, but the physics of light and glass still remains. The 50mm focal length still reigns supreme. So today, if you'll allow me a few minutes of your time to ramble about lenses yet again, I'd like to talk about my personal journey with 50mm lenses, why I actually swore off of them for a long time, and why I've come crawling back and become their biggest fan once again. What's up? My name is Walter. I am a photographer and commercial filmmaker based in the southeastern United States. And on this channel, I'm all about putting the fun back into professional photography. So if that's something that you're interested in, then please subscribe to see more crap from me. So I started my 50mm journey like almost everybody else. I'm squeaking on this shelf. I was told that I needed one, so I got one. The 50mm is often the first lens everyone tells you to upgrade to once you realize that your variable aperture kit lens sucks. So with me being a poor college student at the time, I needed the cheapest 50mm I could find, which turned out to be this Nikon 50mm 1.8D. This is actually the only piece of camera equipment from the beginning of my career, like 10 years ago, that I still have with me today, but more on this lens later. Like most photographers on a similar journey, upgrading to a prime lens like this really helped me realize how much better my photography could be with the right glass. So I was off to the races. Now, with me shooting on a crop sensor DSLR, I then learned that it might make more sense to actually get a 35mm lens, as that field of view on APS-C would actually give me that effective 50mm field of view. So once I got a good 35mm from my Nikon D3200, I was really off to the races, shooting all kinds of different photos that I really loved at the time. And once I upgraded to a full-frame Nikon camera, I was back to Old Faithful here, and I used this lens for absolutely everything. Now, along the way, I did pick up another lens or two, like a Nikon 28mm 1.8, a couple of zoom lenses here and there, but I always just wanted to use my 50. You know, it was so small and light, and even though it was pretty soft, wide open, I still just loved the look, and I really built the beginning of my photography and videography career on this lens. In 2017, I actually toured briefly with a band as their merchant photo guy, and I did the whole thing with just my old Nikon D600 and this 50mm lens. So when I say I use it for everything, I really mean that I use it for everything. Fast forward to when I made the jump to Sony mirrorless in 2018. And you can bet your sweet candy ass what my first lens was for my Sony a7 III. That's right, it was the 28mm f2, a decision that still confuses myself to this day. I could wax poetic about why I resisted a 50mm, but it really boiled down to the fact that I just felt bored with that focal length at that point. After using a 50 for so long and for basically everything, I seized the opportunity to just go in a different direction for a while. And it really was a while. I did pick up that really cheap Sony 50mm 1.8 not long after getting into the Sony system, but I didn't use it that much, and it didn't take long for the autofocus motors in it to just stop working, and I didn't even bother to replace it with any other 50. And by this time in my photographic career, I was just done with the 50mm focal length, and would be for a lot longer than I intended. And it wasn't until 2 years ago in 2023 when I finally picked up another 50, and it immediately sparked joy for me again. I had been working in full-time commercial video production for a while at that point, and came to really feel a gap in my kit. I had also started investing into Fujifilm, which I had decided was going to be my main photographic kit, and leave my video work to my Sony equipment. And so as I was getting into Fuji, I saw it as an opportunity to try some focal lengths that I hadn't in a while. So I picked up the 35mm f2 from Fuji. And while it was okay, the image quality wasn't quite up to what I felt like I needed as a professional. So I traded it back in and I got the Fuji 33mm 1.4, which is just a phenomenal lens. And so I was using the 33 a lot, making me really come back around to that 50mm field of view. And it made me feel that gap in my video kit even more, because on Sony, I've been relying heavily on a 35mm and an 85mm to shoot so much of my video work. And you know, 35 can just be so versatile, and 85 is such a classic compressed portrait type look, but the gap between 35 and 85 started to hurt me more and more. So one day I realized that fixing this gap was a lot easier than it used to be back when I was a poor college student. I was so used to having to just deal with whatever equipment I had, so I was still in that headspace for too long. And I realized that, hey, I'm a working professional. I do this for a living now. I can just pick up a cost-effective but still good 50mm lens to fill my focal length gap in my Sony setup. And that 50mm lens that brought me fully back into this focal length was the Sigma 50mm 1.4 Art. Just an incredible lens to this day. I'm filming on it right now, but more on this particular lens later. So in the past 2 years or so, I can't stop picking up 50mm lenses to the point where I now have a pretty good collection of them. I use all of them to a varying degree and for different purposes, but more on that in a little bit. Before we get any further in the video, allow me to try to pay some bills really quick. I'm a small channel with no sponsors, and I make these videos out of passion for photography and the community around it. But you can show your support for me and what I do by checking out my preset pack called Fujifilm. Fujifilm is inspired by, but not intended to replicate, those Fujifilm colors that we all know and love. These are presets I made myself a few years ago and still regularly use when I'm editing photos from almost any digital camera. Inside the Fujifilm preset pack, you will find Fujifilm Chrome, Fujifilm Astia, Fujifilm Superia and Superia Light, Fujifilm Acros, and Fujifilm Simple. I personally use the Superia Light preset all the time to give myself the rich greens and that nostalgic film look that I love, because RIP to the actual Superia film stock. For my Fujifilm photos in particular, I actually use my presets as just a starting point, and then I change the color profile in Lightroom to any of the Fujifilm simulations under the camera matching section. So if you shoot Fujifilm as well, you might get a lot of value from the tweaks I've made in the tone curves and the color shifts, even after the film simulation is applied. So if you want to give yourself a little jump start in your editing to bring your photos from dull and lifeless to punchy and exciting, please check out Fujifilm and use the code in the description to get $5 off of your order for a grand total of only $15. And if you don't want to buy the whole pack, that's totally fine. You can also download Fujifilm Chrome on its own entirely for free, either to try out before you purchase the whole thing, or just so you can get a free preset and then, you know, go on about your merry way, because that's fine too. Consider that my gift to you for watching this video. Thank you for that support. Now let's go back to what you came for. Real quick, I just want to talk about why I think the 50mm field of view is so good. There's always been a lot of debate over what the best or most versatile focal length is, and opinions vary pretty wildly here. A common preference is for 35mm for being the most versatile, which I think is quite valid, especially considering how much I use my 35mm lens. I'm filming on the Sigma 50 Art right now, but I also own the Sigma 35 Art, which I've filmed like almost all of my other videos on this channel. It's a phenomenal lens. It's great. Love 35mm field of view. And 40mm has been enjoying a sort of renaissance over the past couple years as well, and for a good reason, as it is also a very versatile focal length. I actually made a whole video about using the Voigtlander 40mm 1.2 in New York a couple weeks ago, so if you want my full thoughts on such a thing, you can go check that out. And while I expect my opinion on the matter to continue to shift and evolve as it always has, I think right now, 50mm is my favorite and most versatile focal length for me and what I shoot. I can do portraits, both close-up and environmental. I can do detail shots for interiors. I can do general walk-around photojournalistic style stuff, detail shots at weddings, you name it. Yeah, it's not quite wide enough to like comfortably shoot in a very small room like some wedding venues have, nor is it quite enough reach to shoot a wedding ceremony or a church service without getting a little too close for my liking, but I don't think it's intended for such a thing anyway. But if you have to shoot those things with just a 50, you can certainly make it work. I did for a long time, and you can make it work a lot easier than trying to back way up with an 85mm or get very uncomfortably close with a 35. it's quite easy to fill the frame with a 50, especially if you're able to move around a little bit and intentionally compose your subject with your background and your foreground elements. And because 50mm is so ubiquitous, there are a ton of lens options for basically every camera system, and they tend to be the most affordable and performant, meaning you get a lot of bang for your buck with a good mid-range option. So I'm going to round out this video by talking about all the 50mm lenses I currently own and what I love and maybe don't love about each one. And so maybe you'll find this part fun, maybe not, I don't care, but I like to think that at least somebody will find some value in seeing what 50mm lenses I own and how I decide to shoot each one depending on what I'm shooting. Quick disclaimer before we get into these lenses, I shoot across 3 camera systems. That's Sony, Nikon, and Fujifilm. Sony and Nikon are full frame for me, and Fujifilm is, of course, crop sensor. So when I'm talking about 50mm lens options for Fujifilm, I'm going to be looking at lenses around the 35mm focal length, which is an effective 50mm field of view on that smaller sensor. I'm fully aware that a 35mm lens is still a 35mm focal length, no matter what sensor size it's on. So your compression and all that will still be the same. But the crop sensor of the Fujifilm camera system does render it at a 50mm field of view, which is how I shoot these lenses. So if I were to put a 50mm lens on a Fuji, I'd have to shoot it more like an 85mm lens because that's the field of view that it would give me. So field of view nerds can leave me alone on that one. As we look at each lens, I'll also be showing some photos that I've taken with each one. So whenever you see a photo on screen, just know that it was taken with the lens I'm currently talking about. Okay, so let's take a look at my babies. In no particular order here, I've laid out all of my 50mm lenses that I own and regularly use, starting with the one that actually just filmed the rest of that A-roll you just watched, but this is the Sigma 50mm 1.4 Art. I absolutely love the Art series from Sigma, specifically the older ones, like before they started like really adapting them for mirrorless cameras. So even though this is a Sony E-mount lens, this part here is kind of like an adapter built into it because it's like a DSLR lens that they adapted, you know, for mirrorless. So these older art lenses from Sigma just have such an amazing character about them, and even though they're big and heavy and bulky, which means I don't typically want to use it for a whole lot of like travel or like wedding photography, even because it starts to wear on me after a while, it's still just an amazing lens for video production, which is why I use it all the time for interviews and talking head type stuff. So absolutely love this lens. Don't use it for as much photography these days, but for any kind of video production, it's amazing. And if you're a little bit stronger, if you're willing to put up with the weight, you can use it for some good photography as well. Onto this next one here is the Fujifilm 33mm 1.4. I mentioned this in the rest of the video, but man, what a lens. This is incredible. This is kind of the lens that brought me back into the 50mm realm, partly both these, this one and the Sigma 50 I just showed you, but this lens is just amazing. Such a cool rendering. It's very sharp, and some people say it's too sharp, too modern for Fuji, but I don't think I could disagree more. I think it is, yes, very sharp to the point where I can very comfortably use it for anything professional, but because it's on that Fujifilm X-Trans sensor, that gives it its inherent character. So performs very well. The autofocus is great. The image quality is great. Just an amazing lens. Absolutely love that one. Now, this is another one we've already talked about. This is my old Nikon 50mm 1.8D. I don't use this lens a whole lot these days. Sometimes on my Nikon N75, which is a film camera that I talked about in a video a couple weeks ago, actually, if you can go check that out. It's very nice and light, so if I want a really lightweight setup, I will throw this on my Nikon film camera, but I don't typically use it a whole lot anymore because of another lens that I will talk about in just a minute. So this, I've actually made a whole video about this lens as well. This is an old Zeiss Jena pen color 50mm 1.8. It is very good. I still really love this lens. My problem with it now is that I don't know if it's falling apart. It seems to be serviced, but I don't know if you can see this. It's starting to get a little wiggly on me, like some of the elements are coming apart or just getting a little loose, and that's a little concerning. And so I have not been using this one as much as of late, purely because of that. It does not spark a whole lot of confidence as I'm shooting it, but I do really love this lens. Amazing rendering from it. I've used it on my Nikon ZF and my Fujifilm X-T5 and absolutely love it. So if I can find like a good, affordable way to get it serviced, I might do that, but for the time being. Can't use it in a whole lot of good faith anymore. Maybe in a very careful environment, you know, in the house or something. But for right now, that might have to go back on the shelf. This one is probably the one I'm stretching the most as far as like my usability with it, but this is the cult classic, the Helios 44-2. It's actually technically a 58 millimeter, so I am kind of stretching the definition of 50 here, but I thought I would include it anyway. I picked this up several years ago when a lot of people were talking about it, and people are still talking about it now, but just not as much as they used to. But I bought it to adapt to my Sony a7 III, and you know, because I thought I could get into some manual focus photography and video at the time. And I don't think I was good enough then. I don't think it was something that I could have done at the time. I think now if I were to try it again some more, I might find some good use out of it, but I just have other better 50mm lenses that I like to use, and I find the very crazy bokeh that this lens is famous for to actually be a little distracting most of the time, and so only if I feel super creative might I pick this up, but for right now, this mostly sits on the shelf. Up next is the TT Artisan 35mm 1.8 Mark II. I actually did a full review on this lens last week. Thankfully, TT Artisan sent this lens out to me to review. This is for the Fujifilm X mount, and it is a very good lens for the price. Punches way above its weight. Again, I did a whole video on this lens just last week, so I won't go into too much detail here, so you can watch that video. It's just a really good lens, again, especially for the price, and if you're in the market for something like this on a crop sensor camera, I don't think you can go wrong with it. Up next is my most recent pickup. This came in like 2 weeks ago, but this is the classic, the amazing, the stupendous Sony Zeiss 55mm 1.8. In my opinion, I think Sony kind of peaked with their 50mm primes when they released this lens. Now, truth be told, yes, they have released technically, you know, better lenses since then, especially with their G Master 1.4 and 1.2s, but I'm sorry, Zeiss and Sony were just absolutely cooking with this lens. It is incredible. I actually borrowed it once from a friend several years ago. I had a portrait shoot lined up, and I didn't have a good portrait lens at the time, and so I reached out to my friend who I knew had this lens, asked if I could borrow it. He let me do it, and I just did that one shoot on it, gave the lens right back, and I never bought it or used it again, even though I absolutely loved it. And I think I can still go back and look at those photos from that shoot and still be really happy with how those photos came out. This lens just has an amazing rendering to it. It has like that, I think still some of that old school Zeiss vintage characteristics that we really like, but you know, it's modern. It's on a full frame Sony camera and just does incredibly well. I finally picked it up myself again a couple weeks ago because it was another one of those moments like, hey, I'm an adult with my own money and I do this professionally. I can now finally buy this lens that I've not been able to stop thinking about for like 7 years. So finally picked it up. I've been using it on my Nikon ZF. I'm actually going to make a whole video in the next couple weeks about, you know, kind of this lens and other Sony lenses, adapted it onto the Nikon ZF, but it performs amazing. Absolutely love the rendering from it. This is like, I'm going to have a hard time not using this lens for a little while I'm still definitely in the honeymoon period with it, but just an incredible lens. Love, love, love this lens, and especially compared to my other 50mm lens for Sony E-mount, just the size and weight comparison here is it's kind of just speaks for itself. So the Sigma is my go-to video lens for 50, but anything photo-wise, man, it's going to be this Zeiss 55mm. Again, I know I'm stretching the 50mm definition by giving it an extra 5, but you know, it counts, whatever, who cares. The next one, we're going back to Nikon for a minute, is another kind of recent pickup for me. I actually bought this physically just to use on my Nikon film camera, but it is the Nikkor 50mm 1.8G. This is kind of like the much better version of the D here, so it's a good deal sharper. Still very lightweight, still, you know, very easy to tote around, but it's just all around a better lens than the D. And if I were to have stuck with Nikon DSLR longer than I did, probably would have picked this lens up for myself to upgrade from the D here. It's just an incredible lens, just a classic for a reason. Still very, like I said, very lightweight, but performs really well, and I love what it's been doing on my Nikon film camera lately. So again, mainly just a film lens at this point. If I get an adapter to use it on my Nikon ZF, I might try that at some point, but those adapters are a little bit expensive for what you get, so that might be a little while from now. And the last one I want to talk about is another lens for my Fuji system. So it is a 35mm, but it is the TT Artisan 35mm 1.4. You know, I already talked about the TT Artisan 35mm 1.8 Mark II. This is an autofocus lens. Like I said, that one's great. This is a manual focus lens that I really like. It is built very nicely. Just looking at the whole construction all around, I don't know exactly what material it's made of, but it's a nice hefty metal that still feels very lightweight, so it feels great in the hand for that reason. You have a nice clickable aperture. I'm gonna let you hear this in the microphone. Just sounds amazing. It's a really nice, satisfying click, and it goes all the way open to 1.4, which is just great. Also, it has this lens cap that twists off, which is kind of fun. And also it's just a tiny little lens, especially when you take the lens cap off. You know, it doesn't really add that much, but for some reason with the lens cap off, it just feels absolutely tiny. And when put on my X-T5, it is a really portable setup, and just a really cool rendering to it as well. It's a little soft wide open at 1.4, but I still think perfectly usable, of course, depending on exactly what you're shooting. But, closed down to even like F2, it sharpens up really nicely. Wide open, or not wide open, but closed down to F4, just an amazingly sharp lens from corner to corner. And for less than $100, it's really hard to say no to a lens like this. Just a funky little boy that performs way above its weight, much like the other TT Artisan lens that I have. I just love all these lenses. They all have their different capabilities and purposes, depending on what camera system I'm shooting on. So, I could pare this all down and shoot only on the Fuji 33mm, or just on the, where's the Zeiss? Where's my boy? The Zeiss 55mm if I want to shoot on Nikon and Sony. But I like having all these options for what I'm shooting, and so I don't expect to get rid of any of these anytime soon. I actually expect this collection of 50mm lenses to only continue to grow. So what do you think about the 50mm focal length? Do you find yourself using it all the time? Is it your first prime lens as well? Have you gotten a little bored of it too? And maybe you clicked on this video to reignite your love for it. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments, as I do my best to respond to everyone. I love the community that I've been building on my channel here, so please feel free to keep up the conversation with me there. If you want to support me even further, you can like this video, as that tells the YouTube algorithm that this video should be pushed out to more potential viewers, and I really appreciate such a thing. You can also subscribe, because I make one video a week, giving you a consistent stream of content to watch from me. So if you like this video and you want to keep up with what I'm doing in the future, that's the best way to do it. You can also support me financially and get really versatile presets by picking up the Bougie Film preset pack for yourself if you like the way I edit my photos. You can also download that free Chrome preset, as even those free downloads tells me that I'm doing at least something right. And I forget to mention this in like every video, but you can also follow me on Instagram, link in the description, which is where I post mainly like my wedding photography. And if you don't want to do any of that, that's totally fine, because I will see you in the algorithm in 6 months.